Ian, I've got a problem. I can't hear you. Say again.
Claire can hear me. Can you
Okay.
hear Claire?
Claire?
Can you hear me, Simon?
I can. Hang on a second. Let me just make sure that's going out in the stream. Sorry, 1 second. Apologies,
dear.
everyone.
Oh, Simon has now become very quiet. He may have
Okay.
just drifted away. No, he's come back.
Yeah. Okay. And Claire, can you just say something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. We're good. Right. Let's try that again. Sorry.
Do you want to go for the start again, or do you just want me to lead in and you cut it out?
Just lead in and cut it out, and I'll just quietly mount in the corner.
Perfect.
Hello,
Welcome
everyone.
to the. Oh, you've gone. You've come back in there. Have you stopped?
No, we're going. We're still live.
Marvelous. Let's go again. This is there. You're seeing behind the curtain. Those of you that are watching live, let's try that one last time. Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we discuss matters of international, national, and local importance in a calm, measured, and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury, the one frantically pulling his hair out trying to sort out the audio issues. Evening, Ian.
Mark, good evening. And tonight, a matter of, well, at least national importance, if not international importance. We're looking at the issue of menopause, women's health, and because, let's be frank, Simon, neither of us are experts in that field, we've got ourselves a learned guest.
Yes, we have indeed. We are joined this evening by Claire Hattrick, who is an executive menopause coach. So knows a darn sight more about this than we do. So good evening and welcome, Claire.
Good evening, Simon E, and thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to join you tonight. And yeah, I'm hoping to educate you all on menopause, so when everybody leaves the call, they will be a lot better informed. If you are a woman, 51% of us will go through menopause, and the other 49% will be affected by menopause in some way, shape, or form, whether that be partner, work colleague, niece, neighbour, or other.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's certainly the big issue, even if it isn't getting the audience that it should deserve. But we're here to listen, and we're here to learn. So, members of the audience, if you've got any questions, then by all means, please do pop them into the comments as we go along, and we'll talk through them as we go. But we've got some questions for Claire. So, shall we get kind of right into them and get cracking? Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks. So, Claire, I guess then the simplest thing for us to start with is of course, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up working in this field?
Absolutely. So I'm now 57, and unbeknown to me at 40 years old, and in fact probably a few years before then, I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I had rolled on to my little finger, a wedding ring finger. I kind of remember staggering into the bathroom and thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? That for me was the start of 10 years of menopausal joint health, where I was left basically unable to stand, sit or walk. I've gone from kind of having 2 doctor's appointments in 20 years to having my permanent car parking space outside. I was under 11 consultants, things like fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, arthritis, to name a few, but not one consultant could tell me what was wrong with me. I talk very openly and honestly about lots of the symptoms that I'm sure we'll cover later on in the show. But for me, I suffered really badly with my mental health. I didn't think at the time I was depressed, but I think not being able to sit, stand or walk, and anybody in the professional medical world being able to tell you why. I stopped leaving the house. I spent a lot of time unhealthily up the top of our local car park thinking, well, I'm not depressed, but I have no enjoyment in life. And obviously getting in this space, I realise now the psychological symptoms happen often before any of the physical ones do. And I remember looking back in hindsight, a year before, I'd been driving a lot of friends down the M3 to go to the theatre in Southampton, and I stopped the car on the in the fast lane and got out of the car. And sadly, not one of those friends to this day asked me what was that about. And so loneliness was a big one for me. So fast forward, possibly about just under 11 years, I was being sent by all the consultants to go and see a male physio, and he was my light bulb moment. And I went in, Tim, this particular day, would drop to my knees, crawl to the end screen where he always was, and he'd kind of lift me up and help me up and lean against his powered electric couch. And I looked at him and said, "Am I dying and nobody wants to tell me?" At this point, he said, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to treat you. We need to go back to your GP, and this needs to be sorted once and for all." So he kind of helped me into my jacket. I could never bend my elbows. My knees and my hips were my main joint issues. He kind of limped me back up the road in the rain and caused a bit of a scene for my GP, and said to the receptionist, "You need to look at this lady's hormones." Didn't say menopause. And it was only then that people started to say to me, "When was your last period?" Well, don't know, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. I'm part of a big project today with one of the big hospitals in London. They have access to my medical records, and they realised that after 2,500 blood tests, blood test 3 when I was 40 shows I had 8% estrogen left in my body. Women are estrogen dominant, but when you've only got 8%, obviously that's what gives us so many issues, and hopefully I'll explain that later on. And it was really in lockdown. I've got identical twins. They came home from uni, and they said to me, "Mum, I was really jammed up on menopause by this point." And they said to me, "Look, we think you should start a blog, we should start a website to help other people and make sure they don't suffer the same as you." So July 2020, we launched the Executive Menopause Coach.com. Within possibly about 6 months, I wrote an easy to read, a few pages per symptom book aimed at men and businesses, as well as informing women at a younger age. Very, very simple, easy to read, not too overwhelming. Leave them in the workplace. It kind of really gets a good conversation going and is a great resource and tool. Then I went on to, I was then invited in lockdown to chair some rooms for a social media app called Clubhouse. I met a lot of OBGYNs in the state, the Harley Street gang from over here in the UK. And that really projected me into the social media world. We've got quite a big following on Instagram. I've done lots of celebrity chats, and they're brilliant at talking about their menopause journeys, and they realise that we need to normalise the conversation. Lots of our elite athletes are really struggling with menopause. It isn't, it takes no prisoners, menopause. 25% of us are utterly flawed. 25% of women will walk it relatively easily, and the other 50% kind of float somewhere in between. I was then invited in by a local business to come and talk about my journey, which kind of back then I was really quite ashamed of. But I've realised now that's really sort of projects me into the limelight, really, because when I talk about my journey, I think it makes people sit up and go, "Wow, that's me. That's my wife. I've heard this from other ladies." I think it's less than 2% of research, it goes to women's health. That needs to change. We're not stay-at-home mums anymore. We go into the workplace, we've got full-time job roles. And I'm really passionate now at going into the workplace, making sure everybody has an education and a mild awareness of what menopause can be, and we keep women in their job roles. And that's kind of how I got into it. I've just turned a really awful negative situation, I like to think, into a positive one. And if I can give back and help other women, then I will be shouting menopause from the rooftops for a very long time.
No, that's brilliant, Claire. No, thank you for that. And I guess your story there is probably at the more extreme end of symptoms. But when we think about sort of menopause and symptoms and timelines, what do most women experience? That this word of menopause can be a little bit almost vague and esoteric. So what is the,
Let me tell you what menopause is. So
that would help.
Unbeknown to me, there's this lovely word flashing around in the medical world now, thank goodness, called perimenopause. This is the time that often women like myself start really suffering. So this is the lead up to menopause. So lots of women have lots of symptoms. I've got a nice list that I will read out to you later. And then menopause is one day of your life, but you don't know when that is until it's 12 months down the line. And that is the last day you ever have a period. So the average woman, every month, an egg is released from one side of the ovary. If it isn't fertilized, it comes away in form of blood, and that's a period. So I may be born and have 3,264 eggs. The lady down the road might have 3,116 eggs. So I hope in time they will give us a rough guide of, maybe some sort of ultrasound scan. We'll scan our eggs and say, you're going to go into an early menopause. You're going to have a menopause relatively late. So if you imagine those eggs have run out, they've expired, no more periods. Once you've gone 12 months and 1 day from your last period, that is post-menopause, which there's no easy way of saying it, but you are post-menopause for the rest of your life. Some women sail through perimenopause. Other women have a really, really bad post-menopause when the estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, women produce 3 times more than men, but we don't retain it. Those 3 hormones are doing a lovely juggling and balancing act until they deplete to a hopefully a manageable level. Saying that, I've got women who contact me on my Facebook group and say, I've started having hot flushes in my 70s and 80s. And this is the problem with menopause. It really is very individual. I might better walk it. The next lady will be absolutely floored with it. You could line up a million women who've got menopausal joint issues as bad as me, but they haven't struggled with anxiety. They haven't struggled with mental health. I stood up against a door frame for 2.5 years to sleep. That was the only way. And now I know I was having panic and anxiety attacks all night, every night, catastrophizing one sentence. I'd think, oh, I walked past Joe in Sainsbury's. Was I a bit offhand with her? And you would literally think about that sentence all night, every night. How I'm here, I actually don't know sometimes, but I am, as you say, Ian, quite rightly, in the extreme 25% of women that we really have struggled. And there's no research as to say, why has Claire Hattrick had such a bad time when my sister has walked it relatively lightly?
And thank you. It's one of those things where it almost just feels from that sort of the first part of that conversation that menopause is something that we, again, it's a word that was almost whispered a little bit, but it's almost that I would think that the majority of people listening would have seen it as a long period of time rather than, if I understand meno from menstruation and pause stop. It all seems relatively straightforward and technical. It's just everything surrounded it seems more complex, which I think is going to lead us into our next question.
Thank you. Yeah. So you kind of led into it a bit there. So I guess we'll ask the straight question. Isn't menopause and its symptoms just an inevitable part of getting older? In an sense, how then can it be proactively managed?
Great question, Simon. I mean, menopause is a natural part of aging. I don't believe it's a disability, even though I felt like I was disabled for years. And I know there's this big conversation that it, should have its own legislation. We need something in place, which I know we're going to cover a bit later on in the show. But definitely for me, we're going to go through it whether we like it or not. We have to involve our LGBTQI+. If you're assigned female at birth, if you've got a womb and ovaries, you will go through menopause. But I definitely think, you don't have to put up with all the symptoms. But the problem is we're not educated at school, so we don't know anything about menopause. I'm hoping that our next generation of women, because of us banging our drums and banging on about it, will go, that's perimenopause. But I still hear horrific things from women saying, I'm 44, absolutely floored, and my GP's telling me to come back when I'm 51. I won't be around then. I'm struggling too much with lots of different symptoms. So it's just having things like HRT. I always talk about the menopause toolbox. And in it, you have to let the woman make her own informed decision. You need your hormone replacement therapy. So this now is, they like to give you what you call transdermal HRT, which goes into the bloodstream, not through the stomach lining, and it comes in form of gel or spray or patches. So you often see ladies changing a patch twice a week on their bottoms or their thighs, or rubbing gel into the, inside of their thighs. If you've got a womb and ovaries, you have to have a form of progesterone, or that estrogen you're taking can make the endometrial lining become thicker and thicker and can cause cancer. So if you've got a womb and ovaries, you have to take estrogen as well as your progesterone. So those, basically, you're replacing the hormones that you've lost. So that's one form. Sometimes for ladies who've tried that and still feel really rubbish about themselves, testosterone can be the missing link. Now, it's available off license in the UK. I'm lucky, most of the doctors in Hampshire will prescribe it. They read you some sort of declaration. Yes, you're willing to take it, and you use a pea-size amount. But again, this is something that's still based, guys, around men. Women say to me, oh, I'm using a sachet. I said, no, 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 no. Squeeze the sachet out into a little dish and divide it into an eighth. We don't make it easy for women. And you use a pea-size amount on your inside thigh. Now, this for some women can be the missing link. For some women, HRT doesn't work. I, without a doubt, needed HRT in my 40s. So once my GP had given me a very unauthorized large dose of naproxen, gave me my life back. I could stand. I didn't have to drop to my knees when I got out of bed every morning and crawl to the bathroom and use my hands and nose to put my electric toothbrush on. Bingo, after 11 years, I had my life back, but I couldn't stay on it. So we then talked about HRT. And I said, I'll try anything. The problem I had is I'm one of these ladies that has an intolerance to progesterone. So having no period for, at this point, probably about 14 years, I started to bleed. So basically the estrogen is thickening the lining of the womb. The progesterone is trying to protect it. And I was just constantly bleeding all the time. So you then have to try and get your progesterone form balanced with your estrogen. Are you keeping up, guys? I hope I'm not losing you.
Yeah, no.
So for me, after 2 years, 4 months, Mid Hampshire Health, my GP, and by this point, I'm quite big in the menopause space, and had a couple of private menopause GPs that were interested in my story, and for their research said, could they join the call? After nearly an hour, they all looked at me and said, you can't go on like this. It's not safe. Your endometrial lining is 5 times thicker than the safety guidelines. You've got to come off it. Now, at this point, I'm single, I'm living at home. I was mortified. I said, I might not be able to walk. I might not be able to sit down again. I might not be able to stand. So they were all very good, very supportive. And for the next 3 weeks, they phoned me on my landline every day to make sure I got out of bed. And I'm a success story that I'm now surviving very nicely without HRT. I think, or I don't think, I'm lucky enough to know with the research I take part in that kind of all my hormones are pretty well depleted. I'm well aware that the remaining ones could fluctuate later on in life, but I'm pretty much, everything is depleted to a very minimal level. So I survive basically on nutrition, on exercise, which I'm sure we'll cover. But it's had, back to that menopause toolkit, it's having nutrition, having that exercise. You're not going to exercise if you're in a really bad place, if you're anxious, if you don't want to leave the house. Women put on weight. We put on that little meno belly. It's not anything women are doing. You can be exercising. I'm one of those sad people that, as Ian will tell you, that I love going to the gym. But I've put on weight around my middle. It sits around your visceral fat sits around your middle, unfortunately. It's the way women are built. But it's empowering women with all that information, that it's having that nutrition. You need to exercise. Maybe supplements will work for you. Eating more protein, staying fuller for longer. It's educating women to understand these are the things you can do to help yourself. Don't write off CBT. People are like, how come our government is now allowing us to have CBT? That would have helped me possibly with a horrendous debilitating anxiety, but obviously it wasn't going to help with my joint pain. So there's your menopause toolkit. In it, you need every bit of information possible to help with this really debilitating for 25% of us time in our lives. I say to women that they're very much, still in the fold of HRT causes breast cancer. That has absolutely been blown out of the water now. In 2002, our wonderful worldwide press got hold of some research that was done on ladies between 62 and 65 who were all morbidly obese. As I said earlier, you want to try and catch women in their 40s before the symptoms become too debilitating. So you wouldn't really be starting HRT and you're at the 62 and 65. And basically, there was a very small increase in breast cancer. So, my goodness, the whole world, women stopped taking it. I dread to think how many marriages ended, how many women committed suicide. More women commit suicide in their mid 40s than at any other age. So, now we've got to undo the damage now. Women have got to have that informed choice. HRT does not increase your risk of breast cancer. Drinking 2 glasses of wine a night does. So it really is making sure we bust those myths, and that women, you might decide you don't want to stay on it, but my personal motto is suffering should not be an option. You can be like this. I mean, we say between the official stats, and they're wrong, I'm telling you now they're wrong, between 4 and 7 years to go through your menopause symptoms. Most of us are still touching between 10 and 15. And I know there's massive research going on with our wonderful universities up and down the country who are looking at menopause and sleep issues. If you're having hot flushes every night, your husband, partner, loved one will be affected, because if you're drowned in sweat every night, and I hope everybody, especially tonight in the
sympathise
UK,
with that right
I know,
now.
Simon, you've been mopping your brow.
Yeah.
I don't get hot flushes, don't laugh. I'm actually to the contrary. I'm normally quite cold. I'm not tonight down here in Hampshire. But if you imagine, it is going to have an effect, because if you're sat in a pool of sweat, you've got to strip the bed. That means your partner's got to get out of bed, and it affects everybody. So if we can talk about these symptoms and not just the biggies, the main 34, I'm going to read you a list of some really bizarre symptoms in a bit. And it does make people sit up and say, right, that's why in the morning she's having a hot flush.
Right.
So basically, we have receptors all over our body. They are in our little toe, our vaginas, our eyes, our heart, our brain. When the hormones stop being sent to all these receptors, this is why women are so flawed. Do you remember that slide, Ian, when I came into your workplace? I said, everybody has to look at this slide. It shows basically all the receptors are almost like on kind of shutdown, because they're not receiving the hormones that your body relies on. So in the morning, you're in work and you've answered the phone with your school telephone number, and you can't remember who you're working for. By lunchtime, you've had 6 hot flushes on the trot. Then in the afternoon, you can't sit down because your vaginal dryness is so bad. And in the evening, you forgot to pick the kids up from school because your brain fog's come back into play again. So it really can be very debilitating. And it's because these receptors all over our body aren't receiving those hormones anymore. I know I've gone around in a tangent, but I hope I'm trying to explain what menopause is.
No, you've covered it. I did want to kind of ask as a follow up to that, because you talk about quite a variety of things, and I know we're going to talk about kind of symptoms in a second, but I'd like to think that in the 21st century, in 2025, that women aren't still struggling to get their doctors to listen to them when they go to them with health concerns. Are they getting listened to when they're approaching their doctors?
Unfortunately so. Unfortunately, I get emails from women every week saying, I've been to see my doctor 7 or 8 times, and normally I've got a protocol. First of all, phone back and ask to speak to whoever deals with your menopausal women. I normally stick my fingers in the air to hear the laughter. Then I say ask to speak to and see whoever deals with women's health. Normally some doctors, it may be, yes, we've got one of those. And a lot of doctors, we don't have anybody who does that. Then I normally say, please go back and see your GP and go with a symptom tracker, which I've got on my website, and write down. So it says menopause symptom tracker. So you go in, you've given the answer to your GP because it's on the top of the paper. And if you can also go along with, thank you, Simon, with everything filled in, because the problem you've got is you will often wait up to 4 months to see anybody, and then you've got 8 minutes. Now, I'm trying not to gabble through this conversation because there's so much that I want to inform you all with. But if you imagine you're a woman who's in a really bad place, you are not having a good time. A lot of the time women sit there for the first probably 7 or 8 minutes and are in floods of tears because they're overwhelmed with it all. They don't really know what to say. They miss out lots of bits and pieces. And often women will take menopause apps. And I always say, don't go back to pen and paper because you've waited ages to get this appointment. And some women say to me, I didn't get a signal. So unfortunately, go back to the old pen and paper. But continuing with what you were saying, Simon, women of colour, black women are 25% less likely to get a prescription from HRT than their white counterparts. They are 25% more likely to have worse symptoms than their white counterparts. And these ladies are just left to suffer and to struggle. There is no equality. Often in our medical space, and we are trying to make, part of the campaigns, the Make Menopause Matter campaign I'm part of, and the Menopause Mandate, which is part of lots of celebrities and MPs. There's an APPG group with the Conservative, Green Party, Reform, Labour Party. Everybody comes together, and there's lots of men that are beginning to join that now. So it's really important that, we're trying to get the government to run some kind of menopause campaign. They had a very successful one, I think it was last year in Ireland, where menopause was in the cinema. It was on billboards, everywhere you went, there was menopause, and it really got the conversation going, and society has changed over there. I think over here we are still running behind the times.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And for me, you painted a fascinating picture there, and quite frightening, really, of the individual impact of menopause. If we can just pivot and talk about, the world of business and how menopause, how does it affect business, and what's the impact for businesses that aren't supporting their workers who are, yeah, if I can say the word, suffering from menopause?
Great question. And I've got some really brilliant stats. I wanted to print them off because they're changing all the time. So, losses to employers, and this is probably one of the biggest. 14 million working days are lost each year to menopause, which equates to 1.88 billion. I'll say that again, 1.88 billion in lost productivity in the UK alone. This may be wrong because there's women like me that don't know they're in perimenopause because we're not educated at school. So this could be as much as 2.9 billion of a cost to businesses because women will be struggling with anxiety. They won't be going into the workplace. So that's a massive waste of productivity, huge cost to the employer. And I love this one again. It costs £30,614.27, according to Oxford Economics, to replace one employee. Now, to have somebody like myself going in once a month, looking after your female workforce, as well as educating your male workforce and teaching them how to deal with their female colleagues, especially if you're in management, that's a very small price to pay if you have 20, 300, 800, 8,000 women a year leaving your workplace at £30,000 to retrain somebody to take their place. Women have worked damn hard to get into possibly senior leadership. So it's so important that we look at, Oxford Economics, £30,000, that's colossal money. Another really good one I like, are the tribunal cases. Now, this is really beginning to take some headway. Direct Line were taken to court for wrongful dismissal, £67,000. Thistle Marine office manager had Karen Farkson, who I know, £37,000. Louise McCabe was a finance director for Salazar. She had £125,000 payout. And there's a groundbreaking case at the High Court with Leicester City Council with a lady called Maria Rooney. And we're awaiting the result with her. She went to her employers, said she was struggling, and actually said, I'm in perimenopause, I'm in management, I can't run my team, I'm not doing very well, and was, quote, bullied out of the workplace. So that could be very interesting when we get the results for that. So if that doesn't wake up and give a shake up to employers, I don't really know what does.
That's massive figures. Sorry,
Yeah,
Ian,
go Simon. No, go on.
No, same thing. I bet you were probably about this. There's absolutely astounding figures, and especially at the time a couple of weeks ago, the government there was lots of press, obviously, about reducing benefits and trying to encourage people back into the workplace that have withdrawn from the workforce for whatever reason. Just the thing that's kind of screaming out to me is that this doesn't seem to be well known enough or understood enough as an issue, considering it affects 50% of the workforce. It's actually, I don't really have the words without kind of getting, someone will have to bleep me out. What were you going to say, Ian?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I think it is that, how can this have gone unnoticed, I think is what you're trying to frame there. So I guess from looking at it from a good employer standpoint, Claire, what are the good employers doing to what, oh God, at the risk of sounding like management jargon, what does good look like?
To me, would be having just a few simple things in place. Number one, making sure once a year, and this is this is what I think every employer should do, have a menopause session. Everybody has to attend a menopause session from senior leadership down once a year. You imagine the people that are switching roles, new people that are coming in to the workplace, women that are going into menopause and suddenly don't know, I'm going to say their arse from their elbow. It is, you stand there in the middle of a presentation and women say to me, I stood up in front of 500 people and said, I don't know why I'm standing here. And it's absolutely soul destroying. So if you had a male colleague, for example, who understood that, they would go up, stand next to that lady and say, what Karen's trying to say is, and then she'd be, oh yeah, no, I'm back on form. It's all about having that education and a little bit of empathy. No, I've gone off at a tangent, Ian. I think if every employer had a menopause policy in place, lots of them do a lovely tick box exercise, and women say to me, we've got one, but nobody can find it. To me, it should be on maximum 2 pages, laminated, on view for everybody to see. Stick it up if you're a garage, have it up in your service department, so that your male management can look at it and go, right, where can I signpost this lady? She's really struggling. We've got an external source. We've got Claire, the Executive Menopause Coach. I can signpost her. We've got, I don't know, free Bupa cover, but unfortunately you only often get 10 minutes with them. Might be able to help her with some HRT. I can signpost her to, if you've got a menopause office angel, you might better get somebody to go and speak to her if you've got a female colleague on meltdown. And it's just making those what they call reasonable adjustments in the workplace. Everybody's different. I've done some work with the police, and if you imagine, you can't say to a female police officer who is having a really heavy period twice a month, well, you can work from home, because if you're a PC, you need to be on the streets. But what you could do if she's having a heavy period is say, you can have as many toilet breaks as you want. We realize that, you've just got to include everybody, and what one woman's symptom is, another isn't. Some women say to me that they've always suffered with headaches. They're now really struggling with migraines, and 2 days a month, they're floored. Now, women say to me, I can't speak. If I say menopause or perimenopause, I will lose my promotion. I will be ousted from the senior leadership team, because they won't think I can do the job. So the only thing I can do is either cut my hours or leave altogether. What is that about? Because women still say to me, I only had a call on Friday from a lady, and I literally was begging her to let me put a letter together and say, look, we can get through this. But she said, I can't deal with any more than I'm coping with at the moment. I've got, we are women that are in that sandwich generation. We've got elderly parents, we've got young children, we're in full-time job roles, we're running the house, we're running around after, like I say, parents that may be unwell. Plus we look after our husbands as well. You've got your poor husband in the man shed, you've got a daughter starting periods, a testosterone-fueled teenage son, and you know what? It's easier to leave the workplace than actually speak to somebody. And that breaks my heart, because how many hundreds, thousands of women are sat at home in the UK alone because they cannot approach their employer.
That's a great point. Simon.
Yeah. So Are there? We're at 5, aren't we now? Sorry, I've now lost
Yep.
Sorry, it's me. I know, and
No.
I'm going off at a tangent. This
No,
is what
no,
postmenopausal women do, boys.
No, but to be fair, it's a broad subject that touches lots of aspects of women's lives, and there's only one way to inform, isn't there? And that's actually to give information, and that's to talk through it. I think, sadly, there's not enough information out there for employers or for anybody else, or it isn't talked about, as you were saying. And it's not like women in the workplace need new reasons, new ways for people to undermine them. So and to lose all of that experience and that quality of leadership and all of those people that have worked hard through their careers, that's just a crying shame. That's awful for them and for the company that they work for. So I'm finding my way gently back to the question, so my apologies. I'm going off on a tangent now. So
it's me, Simon. This is what us postmenopausal women do. We go off at a tangent, and you have to learn to keep up. So I hope I'm giving everybody a little bit of a lesson as to how we end up.
No, don't worry. We're getting some exercise. So are there legal obligations that exist, or is there planned legislation that will create legal obligations that require employers to provide this support? Is there something there that they should be doing, or is something coming?
Unfortunately, there is no legal obligation at present. We were hoping that this latest government, they have said, and I'm going to read it, new legislation is coming, but it's been kicking around for a while now. Large employers who have 250 staff or more will be required to publish menopause action plans, but they've never said what the action plans are going to be. Laws are expected to pass July 2025. With changes enforced by autumn 2026. What I will say, though, is the Equality Act 2010 and the Health and Safety Act 1974, they can, or people can look back, especially if you decide to take your employer to court, these can be played upon. That how your employer is supposed to sort of, create that obligation to include you, involve you. If you feel that your employer is not treating you fairly, you can be taken to court over those Equality Acts and the health and safety. And I don't think that it should have its own characteristic. It certainly isn't a disability. I don't think we don't need, what we need is understanding and education. I don't think we need to be told we're disabled, because I almost kind of feel personally that's an insult to people who are disabled. With the right information and the right medication and the right research, we should be able to get through this time. And just picking up on something you said a minute ago, Simon, I think women have been so stoic in the past and they just put up and shut up. And if you're struggling with vaginal atrophy, which basically is dryness, women say to me, I can't sit down, so I've just left the workplace, or I don't do that sort of job anymore. But again, it's education, because people don't know what it is, and you can't almost blame the employer if they haven't, or senior management, if they've not had any training, they're not going to know about all these symptoms. And if I may, I would just like to read out a few symptoms for you.
Sure.
So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. So you've got breast pain, brittle nails, cold sweats, dizzy spells, hair loss and thinning, massive mental health issue for lots of women. It's it's the first thing you look at. Sorry, boys. Incontinence, lots of urinary issues, irregular heartbeats and palpitations. Lots of women are blue lighted to hospital, showing heart attacks and it ends up being linked to menopause and their hormones. Irregular periods, itchy skin, that can drive women mad, sitting there itching. Joint pain, osteoporosis, sleep disorder, tinnitus, hearing sensitivity, restless legs, weight gain, weight loss, nausea. Lots of women wake up in the morning feeling very sick. Muscle and tightness and pain, clumsiness, bruising, formication, which is almost like ants crawling under your skin, dry eyes, vaginal atrophy and dryness, horrendous lower back pain, constant UTIs and cystitis, vertigo, sensitivity problems, rosacea, bloating, digestive problems, constipation, diarrhea, flatulence, excessive wind. Guys, I'm going to share this with you. I could fart from the top of the stairs to the bottom, playing the trumpet voluntary with my backside. Who knew gut health was so important during and post menopause? We don't know about these things, but pre and probiotics are an absolute game changer. Electric shock sensation, tingling extremities, change in body odor, hot flushes, night sweats, anxiety and panic attacks, driving anxiety. The amount of women that say I don't drive anymore, and I certainly don't drive at night. Brain fog and memory lapses, depression, difficulty concentrating, fatigue. Women say to me they go and have a sleep in their car at lunchtime, irritability, loss of libido, mood swings, low mood, feeling tense and nervous, lack of interest and enthusiasm in life, crying and emotional spells, loss of confidence, low self-esteem, burning tongue, gum problems, metallic taste, bad breath, sensitive teeth, and I'm going to leave it there. There are nearly 71 symptoms of menopause. We talk about the main 34, 35, but if you imagine some of those women can put up with, they're not debilitating, maybe they're annoying, but some of those are pretty debilitating. I think if you took testosterone and turned the tap on for men, and you literally couldn't sit up in the morning because your back is so bad, let alone put your feet on the floor and walk to the bathroom, or you were up all night with, constantly going to the toilet, urge incontinence, women saying that, they're just sat in nappies because they've got no idea that what we should be doing is using vaginal estrogen, which is a completely nothing to do with HRT. It's localized, it hits the spot. Even if you've had any breast cancers, the latest research is that is safe to use. That's why older women, like my poor mother, who's 82, are racing to the toilets because they've got prolapses, they've got urinary incontinence, urge incontinence, because these women were never taught about vaginal moisturizers and vaginal estrogen.
And Claire, we always knew, and I when we discussed this podcast, I think there's so much in there, and I guess one of the challenges for us as men, and I was very open with, is that Claire will use the word vagina a lot, and the important thing is for men not to go, she said it again, and she's not going to stop saying it. So I guess as men, what apart from not jumping every time you say the word vagina, what do we need to do to be good allies and supporters of the women going through menopause in our lives?
First of all, I've just got to pick up on the fabulous, our little pocket rocket, Carolyn Harris. She's the Labour MP for Swansea South East, I think. She uses the word vaginal dryness in a wonderful Welsh accent. In Parliament, she's got Sir Lindsay Hoy. Everybody is saying it now because she said, why are we saying down there and we're not using the correct terminology? And I remember my daughter saying, Mum, do you always have to talk about vaginal dryness? And I said, well, if I don't, how are we ever going to educate the next group of women coming into this time? They're going to do what we've done, and they're going to struggle, and they're going to suffer. And I've been lucky. I don't actually suffer with anything like that, and I'm not going to, because I know to use the moisturizers and the vaginal estrogen, and I will use it till the day I die. There is no risk of cancer. There's a lot of research that's gone into it. But women say to me, I've gone for a smear. It was so painful. I told them to stop, and I'm not going back for one. So how many women are going to end up with cervical and any of the gynae cancers? Because nobody's told them that if you use vaginal estrogen, basically it's let's say in a layman's terms, boys, it's a form of moisturizer and lubricant, because we've lost all that elasticity. So if I don't talk about it, the next women won't. And this awful vicious circle of we can't talk about it. We can't say the word vulva and vagina. And that is vulva and not Volvo for any males that are listening in.
Thank you.
It really is a matter of, if we don't say it, nobody else is going to. So I try and make sure in every conversation, I kind of normalize it a bit, because when men couldn't get erections, some bright spark designed Viagra. Fantastic, happy days. What they didn't realize is, as women of an age have got vaginal dryness. So they haven't helped both parties. So it's all these things that I feel really passionate that anybody listening to this, we have a chuckle, we have a laugh. Fantastic. I don't have a problem with that. But at least you'll go away and you'll say to your wife, partner, loved one, anyone that can't sit down, that you know well enough to say this to, of course, have you thought about vaginal estrogen to your loved ones, and maybe drop a hint to somebody else? Obviously, maybe don't say that to your work colleagues. But if we don't talk about it, nobody else is going to, and we don't break this taboo subject, which is what I feel really passionate about. But I've digressed, Ian, as you know I do so well.
Absolutely. So, but I guess that's the importance, isn't it? That is, that is. So, what more do you think we as men should be doing?
I definitely think education and information is key. Men are typically fixers, but you can't fix us. We're not broken. I know kind of my story is pretty hard hitting. And I guess it doesn't hurt to hear the worst case scenario. Anything better is going to be a bonus. So, one, I guess sharing my story makes you sit up and listen and think, oh my goodness. Secondly, hopefully, if your partner, wife, loved one, or work colleague was ever struggling, you might put two and two together and think, well, she's in her late 30s, early 40s. Could it be something like that? And I think you've got to pick your moment. If it's in the workplace, I think definitely if you've got that menopause policy in place, you've got someone like me coming in, you could say to your female colleague to start with, I know Sandra's really struggling, but we've got the executive menopause coach coming in. I think, you could book her a one-to-one coaching session. It might help her. And, if you come across the chance and the opportunity to speak to somebody, always pick your moment. Don't do it when there's lots of people around, because a lot of women might be embarrassed, might not want to talk to a man, might end up bursting into tears. And again, if the workplace has got a quiet room, somewhere where you've got some water, tissues, sometimes women just need to go and have 5 minutes peace, get over that hot flush, migraine, whatever. Heavy period. I know some really great companies that provide all sanitary wear, bit of perfume, freshen yourself up. They've tried to change their clothing so that women aren't sat, in sweaty, heavy duty uniforms. They've tried to give them lightweight stuff. But I think if you can have these open and honest conversations and you state, we are a menopause friendly employer, we offer regular menopause support, that then makes everybody in the workplace kind of normalize the conversation like we're having now. When it starts off, it's all a bit awkward, but there's lots of women like myself now that we don't want to see our daughters go through this. We don't want to see anybody else. So we're quite happy to step up. When I came into your company, and it was very much the ladies were, we don't care if the men come in, let's have a group session together. Obviously we didn't, we separated it out. And the guys asked really good questions. No question is silly, because if you're confused, if you don't ask, you're never going to learn, and you can't teach your sons, and we can't pass this on. So I think education is key, being informed. If it is a loved one, things like, you're clearly struggling, would you like me to accompany you to the doctors? Sometimes women will go, no, I absolutely don't, I'll go on my own. Other women will say, oh, that's really nice that you want to come, listen, get involved, your partners and loved ones. But I think definitely the being informed, maybe don't go, oh, this isn't menopausal, is it? Probably not your best move.
No.
But I think definitely having that education, speaking to another female colleague and saying, look, we've obviously had Claire in, we had this menopause conversation. But again, if the business, if the company is offering regular support, it should become a topic of very normal conversation that nobody, I have lots of young people come to my sessions in their 20s, and I always say to them, do you mind me asking why you came? Lots of young men, absolutely brilliant. I love our youth of today, because they say, I've come because my mum is really struggling and she hasn't worked for 6 years and she doesn't leave the house. And, these kids are really, I shouldn't say kids, these young people, young adults, they really care about their loved ones. And I think they are going to be the ones that in time normalize the conversation, and they don't care about talking about vaginal dryness. They're normally the ones that sit and go, yeah, my mum's got that, she tells me all about it. And it is just getting the misogyny out of the workplace that we can't talk about it. Women aren't shirkers, they don't want to be sat at home all their lives. But if you're in a really bad place, it's no different than any mental health, whether you're a man or woman. if you're really struggling, what you want is support, not people saying, oh, you know, women just want more time out of work. We don't. We just want that when we're having a bad time, it may be, as opposed to sacking us or making us feel that, you know, because women often say to me, I'm letting the team down, I'm rubbish, I'm not a team player anymore. We do beat ourselves up about it.
No, thank you, Claire. So again, another very thorough and enlightening answer. But our time is nearly up, so I'm just going to throw over to Simon for our last question.
So, I guess then, thinking of the future, in terms of medical change, social change, what's your hope for what will be different about our understanding of menopause? What's that going to look like?
I think to have open, honest conversations is massively up there, as you've probably gathered. I think that we just need greater public awareness. Another thing that I desperately, it will be at the top of the agenda, is improved medical research. We don't research enough into women's health. We seem to put a lot of resources and a lot of money into men's health, and men are the first to say, you know, my wife is the matriarch, she runs the house, she runs the social life diary, you know, I need my wife to be my wife and not to be somebody who, you know, is struggling and a former shell of the woman that I married. And I just think that we need to kind of have a society where women feel a bit empowered and confident during menopause, and not, well, I go and shut myself away at home. And again, it's just back to education, being supportive and being supported. And I think sometimes just telling women how appreciated they are. It's the little things like that. You know, clearly you're struggling. You don't have to talk to me, but I just want you to know that you're a really valued member of the team. We really appreciate you. And just giving them something to hold on to feel, well, do you know what, maybe I can speak a bit more openly about this, and maybe I will pop that email to my line manager and say, I'm not, you know, I'm not performing on all four cylinders at the moment, but I'm having a bad time. But like I say, some women don't know that it's perimenopause. They've got no idea. I wouldn't have. I never even knew, you know, 16 years ago what perimenopause was. But for the future, I don't want to see any other woman go through what I went through, because I don't remember probably nearly 11 years of my life. And for me, that was a really dark time. You know, my mum, my daughters could have lost their mum, and I don't want to see them going through that. So again, it's just wonderful people like you that won't just think this is a woman's issue, this doesn't affect us. And there's lots of you know, men that say, oh, you know, I don't need to be hearing about this. But you do. I had a CEO say to me probably only a few months ago, I don't employ women of menopausal age. So I frantically went through my phone and I showed him 13-year-old Natasha Owens, or she was then, who was post-menopause. She was basically born without any eggs, never had any periods. And that poor young lady is, fair play to her, on social media telling everybody about her 30, 40, 50th vulva and vagina surgery, because everything has dried up. She wears hearing aids. She's had to adopt children. You know, you can't make those comments. We need to be an inclusive and equal society so that women are valued.
And I think that's a perfect place to pause our conversation there, Claire. Thank you so much for giving us your time and really unpacking what I think many of the people who will have watched or listened to this podcast, I'm certain they will have learned something as we both have this evening. So really appreciate you taking the time and coming on to help inform and educate.
Oh, and thank you. Like I say, it's great that, you know, we've got men that actually are interested and do want to be part of the conversation, because it's just too easy to turn a blind eye. And like I say, it just won't ever change unless we break this stigma. And we are all, you know, everybody's going to be affected by it. You know, 51% of the population will go through it. The other 49% will be affected in some way, shape or form. So thank you so much for being so inclusive, and thank you to all your listeners and followers. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Fabulous. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
Our guest this evening has been Claire Hattrick, the Executive Menopause Coach, and the links to her website are in the chat. So please do go have a look at those for the tools that they've got there. And for more information, I've been Simon Sansbury. Join us next week where we'll be taking a look at the last Portsmouth City Full Council meeting before the summer break. And seeing what the big items on the items of the nominations were, and see what were the points of agreement and what were the points of contention. So join us next week at 6:27. But please, in the meantime, do remember to give us a like, give us a comment, give us a follow on Facebook, give us a subscribe on YouTube. Please do remember, Facebook now only keep live videos for a month. So if you want to make sure you've got access to all of our videos, the best way to do that is to subscribe on YouTube, but we're also obviously available wherever you get your podcasts. So see you next week at 6:27. Thanks. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.